All right, today we're tackling one of philosophy's most famous pessimists, Arthur Schopenhauer. We're going to try and break down his huge, and let's be honest, pretty tough, masterpiece, The World as Will and Representation, to figure out why he thought life was such a raw deal, and what, if anything, we can actually do about it.
So Schopenhauer kicks things off with this huge kind of startling claim, and it's really the first pillar of his entire philosophy. And for him, this wasn't just some theory. He thought it was so obviously true that if you really understood what he was saying, you'd have no choice but to agree.
So what does he mean by that? Well, he's basically saying that everything you experience, the sun, the stars, this screen, everything, it doesn't exist on its own outside of your mind. No matter how big and real it all seems, its existence is hanging by the single fragile thread of the consciousness that's perceiving it. So this first part of his whole system is all about what he calls the world as idea, or representation. This is the entire universe, but only as it appears to us, filtered through our senses and our mind.
Okay, so here's the kicker. We can never know what things are really like, in and of themselves. We're sort of stuck inside our own heads, right? We only ever get to see the world through the lens of our own consciousness, which is what organizes everything we perceive into categories like time, space, and cause and effect.
Okay, so if everything we see is just our idea of it, then you have to ask, right, what's behind the curtain? What's the real reality? Well, for Schopenhauer, it's something he calls the will. This is the true underlying reality of everything.
Now, it's really, really important to get this straight. This will he's talking about, it's not a person, it's not a god with a plan. Think of it more like this fundamental, aimless, raw energy that animates absolutely everything, from the force of gravity pulling on a rock to the deepest desires in your own heart.
So get this, the will is this one, single, undivided reality. But the world we see, you, me, that tree over there, the stars, that's just how the will appears to us. Our minds basically chop up this single reality into all these separate things using the grid of time and space. Schopenhauer even had a fancy name for this, the principium individuationis, the principle of individuation.
And this, right here, is where things start to get, well, famously pessimistic. Because if we're all just little individual pieces of this endless, aimless, striving will, what does that actually mean for our day-to-day lives?
Well, according to Schopenhauer, the very act of wanting something, of willing, is by its very nature a form of suffering. I mean, think about it. To want something means you don't have it. It's a feeling of lack, a kind of constant, low-level pain.
And this traps us in what he saw as this endless, futile cycle, which leads to one of his most famous ideas, that life is like a pendulum, just swinging back and forth. On one side, you have pain. That's the wanting. And on the other side, boredom. That's what happens when you get what you want. So what we call happiness, for him, that's just that tiny blink-and-you-miss-it moment when the pendulum passes through the middle.
Yeah, he wasn't pulling any punches. He basically thought our world had all the ingredients you'd need to build a convincing hell. He said if you just walked someone through a hospital, a prison, a battlefield, they'd get it. They'd see what this best of all possible worlds is really like.
And he had this other great little metaphor to capture the whole thing. Our life, it's like trying to blow a soap bubble. You know, you try to make it as big and as beautiful as you can, for as long as you possibly can, all while knowing, for a fact, that it's going to burst.
So, wow, if life is that bleak, is there any way out? Any escape? Well, Schopenhauer says, yes, there are a couple of paths for relief. The first one, and the one most of us can actually experience, is through art.
Okay, so think about it like this. Normally, we're the everyday self, right? We're driven by the will. We look at a tree and think, can I use that for firewood? But when we get totally lost in a piece of art, or just the beauty of nature, we become what he calls the aesthetic self. We stop asking what things are for, and we just see them for what they are. In that moment, we become a pure, will-less subject. And that constant striving inside us, it just goes quiet. It's a moment of peace. And this is exactly why he thought tragedy was the absolute peak of all art forms. Why? Because it doesn't lie to us. It shows us the ugly truth of life, the endless conflict, the suffering. But it also shows us the way out, the path of resignation, where the hero finally finds peace by giving up the will to live.
Okay, so art is a temporary escape, but Schopenhauer pointed to a more permanent and much, much harder path to salvation.
And at the heart of this path is this ancient Sanskrit phrase from the Hindu Upanishads, which was hugely important for his ethics. It's tat tvam asi, and what it means is actually quite simple but also incredibly profound.
It means, this thou art. It's this deep, profound realization that the thing inside you, that striving, suffering will, is the exact same thing inside every other living being. When you really get that, when you see that their suffering is literally your suffering, you can start to overcome your own ego. And that's where real compassion comes from. And it starts to loosen the will's grip on you.
And this leads to the ultimate goal, the final stop on this journey, the complete denial of the will to live. This is the state that for him, the saint or the true ascetic achieves.
Now we have to be super clear about something. This is not suicide. For Schopenhauer, suicide is actually a really powerful act of will. It's someone saying, I want to live, but I can't stand the way I have to live. Denial of the will is the complete opposite. It's a quiet, peaceful turning away from all of life's desires and passions, and it comes from this deep understanding of what reality is. So for him, this is the only way out. The only way to truly break the cycle of suffering and rebirth is to achieve this state. From our point of view, as people driven by the will, it might just look like nothingness, like an empty void. But from his perspective, it's the ultimate freedom.
And that's the really challenging, kind of uncomfortable question Schopenhauer leaves us with. Is that kind of perfect peace worth giving up, well, everything that makes you you? It's a question that cuts right to the core of our being, that very will to live that drives us all.